So here's my top blade guide. I've got two blocks of Bokote, which is a exotic hardwood, and they're held on using these knockdown fasteners. They have a nice wide head using little blocks of wood with a slot in them, and then that's screwed onto here. Now on my old blade guide design, I put some T-nuts in the back here to get the thread for the screw to thread into. But on this one I've simplified it a little bit, so I'm actually just using a piece of exotic hardwood for the backer, and I just tapped the thread straight into the exotic hardwood. For the new blade guide that I made for my 16-inch bandsaw, that's worked out so far. So that simplifies the construction a bit and saves a little bit of money. And the thrust bearing is mounted just on a carriage bolt, like so, and I cut a slot into it on the front with a hacksaw and then put a nut on the back to lock it in place. And it can be moved back and forth just by screwing it in and out of the block with a screwdriver. And to lock the forward and aft position, when it's attached to the guide post, like so, that squeezes this gap shut when I clamp it on here, and that pretty much locks it in place so that this bearing doesn't screw itself in and out on its own. And here's my bottom blade guide, again with the thread for the guide block screw just straight in the wood, and this piece of exotic hardwood is just screwed with a few drywall screws into the end of the body of the guide. So let's put the guide block back on here. And the thrust bearing goes down on here with a washer behind it. And on the opposite side, a T-nut. And I've modified this T-nut so only one of the prongs is still standing. The other ones have been flattened. And that prong goes into the slot. And that prevents that T-nut from turning. So as I tighten this on, so once this is tightened on, I don't need to have access to the other side to hold a nut as I'm tightening this. So I just turn this here, and that locks it in a particular place. And to move it, I just again loosen it, and then I can adjust it, and again lock it in place. So I don't need access to the other side because that's going to be against the frame. So I've measured my guide post, and from where the blade goes to the left edge of the guide post is about 37 millimeters. So I've marked on my frame here 37 millimeters from where the blade is, just by coming in with a square like that and then measuring. So this is where I need to put a cut on the frame. And I've also glued on a piece of hardwood on here just to give me a little bit more bearing surface for that guide column. I've also marked on the bottom where the blade guide needs to go, again by measuring this distance and then measuring it on here and marking it. So if I put the guide on here, you can see it goes right up to the edge of that line. So again, this is where I need to cut the frame to have the right amount of allowance to get this blade guide in exactly the right place. Well, my saw didn't cut quite deep enough, so I'll have to finish this off with a chisel. Close enough. Now the cut along the top for this line is much more critical because the guide post slides along it like that, and if that is not exactly vertical, then the alignment of the blade guides is going to change with respect to the blade as I move it. So I have to jig things up very accurately to make this cut. So I've got a guide rail set up and I've checked that it's the right distance from this mark corresponding to my saw, and that it's parallel to the back edge here, so that I'll use that as my vertical reference, and this track should line it up just right to make this cut accurately. I've had to move my clamps a little bit so they wouldn't get in the way of the saw, but I think I'm ready to make this cut. Well, I couldn't quite cut deep enough with the skill saw here. I just don't have enough depth, especially being on top of this board, so I think I'll try to finish this cut on the table saw. So here's my lower blade guide. And I've got two slots in here because I want to play around with positioning this in two different positions vertically. And this would be the lower position, and this is about as far forward as I'd want to put it. So I'm going to use this big bolt to just mark where I should put the screw hole. So I have a divot here now where the screw needs to go. Now I could use a big wood screw in here, but I'm going to use a threaded insert that's going to go in here, and then a screw like this that goes into the insert. Now to attach this guide post, I've got this clamp that fits on here, and that needs to be screwed in there. That presses the guide post in. Now, last time I built the bandsaw, I used a thing like that, which is a wood screw on one side and a machine screw on the other side, and I just screwed it into the wood. But I don't want to leave that sticking out, so this time I'm just going to put a threaded insert in here and then a screw that goes into that. Now I couldn't find a threaded insert that was big enough for this, so I'm using this thing called a coupler nut. And I'm just going to drill a hole for it, ram it in there, and then put some screws around it to hold it in place. So I've roughened up my barrel nut with a hacksaw. I'm also going to use some glue on it. I'm not sure if that's going to help that much, but I figure it can't hurt.